Engineering managers face a different set of problems than engineers themselves. Whether they are hiring new employees, firing underperformers, or guiding a team of existing engineers, engineering management is all about people. Empathy is paramount because management is like being a professional therapist for the members of your team. Mike Borozdin has been managing engineers for more than a decade and blogs about engineering management at mikebz.com. And in this episode, we cover the core responsibilities of an engineering manager and some strategies around how to do it right. This episode is useful for anyone looking to improve their relationship with their manager, move into management, or improve as a manager. And I hope you enjoy it. Incapsula is a cloud service that protects applications from attackers and improves performance. Incapsula sits between customer requests and your servers, and it filters traffic, preventing it from ever reaching your servers. Botnets and denial of service attacks are recognized by Incapsula and blocked. This protects your API servers and your microservices from responding to unwanted requests. To try Incapsula, go to incapsula.com/sedaily and get a month free for Software Engineering Daily listeners. Incapsula's API gives you control over the security and performance of your application, whether you have a complex microservices architecture or a WordPress site. Incapsula has a global network of 30 data centers that optimize routing and cache your content. The same network of data centers that are filtering your content for attackers are operating as a CDN and speeding up your application. To try Incapsula today, go to incapsula.com/sedaily and check it out. Thanks to Incapsula for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. Mike Borozdin is the VP of Software at Tempo Automation. Mike, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Today we're going to talk about management and some experiences that you've had at different companies. You write about engineering management, and I want to start with some of the topics that you explore in your blog, which will be in the show notes. In a piece that you wrote recently, you talked about how every engineer on a team typically falls into one of two buckets. Either they are helping your team or you need to get them off of the team immediately. And this might sound obvious in theory, but it is hard to do in practice for engineering management teams. Why is that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I sort of want to clarify is your attitude towards engineers should be one of those two things. So it's not necessarily that people are in this binary state of either being great or horrible, but more so that you're either trying to help people improve, or it's probably better for them to move on. So that's a subtle nuance. I think in general, obviously, every manager's dream is that they're growing their people, they're helping them achieve their career goals, that those people, while pursuing those career goals, are helping the company and the team out. But obviously, if it's not working out and that person is just dragging the team down, it could have quite a bit of a negative collateral damage. Why is it our nature to leave on those bad hires longer than we should? Yeah, it's an interesting, that's a great question. I know myself, I always have to sort of check my own attitude and sort of keep good notes of my conversations with people, because I tend to fall into that trap as well, where I just kind of keep things dragging out for longer than they should have. I think part of it is just hiring. Hiring is hard. Hiring good people is hard, and you sort of think back about the number of people that you have interviewed to bring a particular engineer on, and sometimes it's dozens of people. Right, your phone screens, on-site interviews, and then you found somebody, and you can't help but have this emotional attachment. So when things are not working out, which sometimes they don't, it's hard to let go.
And what are the consequences when you leave somebody on for too long? How does that impact the team?
Yeah, I think there is a couple of things that that an underperforming or not motivated individual can have on the rest of the team, and it can be pretty dangerous and sort of contagious. So number one, if your hiring bar and performance bar is high, which it should be if you're working on an interesting problem and delivering impactful software to customers, if you have a number or one or a number of individuals on the team that are underperforming, what will inevitably happen is that just drags the performance of other people down. For instance, if I am somebody who's working really hard, super focused, super energized, and then I'm somebody on the team who's just disengaged, after a while, that disengagement inevitably starts affecting my attitude as well, my energy. We all are affected by that. And that goes, and
it's a toxic environment.
Exactly, and that's work relationships, I think, and personal relationships with friends, as well. We can all think of being in a carpool with a couple of people, and one of them is just like a horrible passenger, and that's just like ruins the entire
everything.
Road trip. Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about hiring, but talking more generally about the qualities of engineers. My experience is that most engineers fall along a barbell curve where they're either A players or they're negative impacting on the team. Do you think that's accurate, or do you think is there a glut of B and C players? Because people talk about, you should only hire A players. In my experience, B and C players are actually not very common. It's usually either really good people or just like they're terrible and they're negatives on the team. It's very rare that you have a net neutral. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't have as much experience in the industry as you, so
yeah, it's interesting. Actually, talking about experience. So when I was thinking about chatting with you and just when I was thinking about like, what do I really have anything to say about this subject? This is like a good meta question. I started keeping notes of all of my interviews in Evernote a couple of years ago. So, over the last several years, I've interviewed about 250 engineers. So I've got a little bit of a sample, maybe not as comprehensive as somebody else, but yeah. So I think that I can see some patterns. So back to your question about the B and C players, there's nuance there. I think there's a few axes along which folks can be evaluated and the things that they bring to the team. So of course, first and foremost is technical ability. Can this person write code? Can this person solve problems? Can this person debug and identify issues very quickly, right? Can this person architect something that's durable and sort of withstands changes in business requirements? So that's one. So that's one axis. And in this case, I think it is not necessarily a bell curve. I think it's more like there is sort of an average.
I said barbell, by the way.
A barbell. Oh,
barbell is like the inverse of a bell.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's what I meant. Right. I think there's sort of like the average, and then there are like really good people. And I think we naturally think of like an average is not so good when we get enough of the really good people around.
So there are B and C.
I would say there is an A and a C.
A and a C.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, every once in a while you come across somebody who is like an F, and then I think in that case you sort of have to go back and be like, how did this person pass my interview? But there are other really key elements as well. So beyond just the technical acumen, I mean, there's people that are good team players, and there you have folks along the spectrum as well.
Good team players, but not necessarily technical. Not necessarily good technical.
Well, I think it's interesting. If you're running an engineering team, I think it's a must that people are technical and that are good at actually writing code. However, you can have somebody join your team who is good technically, but is horrible and cancerous attitude-wise. And that could be from just being an asshole to everyone to just being disengaged. Yeah. There are some really talented people that just become disengaged. And the apathy sometimes it's worse than somebody being angry on the team. Software is obviously a creative, it's technical but it's creative business as well. So you can't never really come to somebody and say like, I think in 2 months that, given this, you guys should be here. I mean, there's some sort of approximate, but energy really makes a ton of difference.
So you mentioned that sometimes an F player makes it past the hiring process. You have to review why that happened in retrospect.
Right.
Do you have any conclusions as to why that has happened in your experience?
It has happened to me. This year is the 20th year I've been in this business of software development and management, and I've made my fair share of mistakes. I think sort of going back. On the cases where I hired people and they didn't work out, like the F players. I had a few of them, and I think not having a deep enough technical interview and just sort of assuming that this person seems like they could do well, and sometimes you talk to somebody who seems like a nice person and you want to work with them, and you're like, they really didn't explain how they solved this problem, and it didn't really, they didn't really go deep on this, but I'm going to cut them a little slack. Why not? That seems like a smart person. And generally, all of those types of folks, swear like, I'm a fast learner, it's like, great. Okay. So, and, I had one guy who joined in, sort of didn't do well on the technical screen, didn't do well, when we sort of probed and asked him some questions. So but seemed like a genuine nice guy. Brought him on and sort of started, and it takes a while to find that out, right? Because generally, like the first several weeks or a month, people are just getting acclimated to the environment, the stack. Yeah. So you can't really tell, like, are they bad or are they just trying to figure stuff out? And then, another sort of month, you're like, okay, that's just weird. We should be seeing more out of this person. And so with this particular guy, I mean, after a while, I was just like, okay, hey, buddy, you're not getting anything done. I mean, is there anything I can do? Like, is it just, can I help you? And so started the performance management, sort of like trying to help him get back on his feet, or I thought back on his feet, because I sort of in the interview assumed that there was some feet there. And then after a while, he just said, like, this software development thing is just too complicated. I'm afraid of changing code. Like, I'm afraid I'm going to break something. I'm like, well, I don't know what we can do with you. I just can't really be effective in this role.
Couchbase is a NoSQL database that powers digital businesses. Developers around the world choose Couchbase for its advantages in data model flexibility, elastic scalability, performance, and 24/365 availability to build enterprise web, mobile, and IoT applications. The Couchbase platform includes Couchbase, Couchbase Lite, which is the first mobile NoSQL database, and Couchbase Sync Gateway. Couchbase is designed for global deployments, with configurable cross-data center replication to increase data locality and availability. Running Couchbase in containers on Docker, Kubernetes, Mesos, or Red Hat OpenShift is easy, and at developer.couchbase.com you can find tutorials on how to build out your Couchbase deployment. All Couchbase products are open source projects. Couchbase customers include industry leaders like AOL, Amadeus, AT&T, Cisco, Comcast, Concur, Disney, Dixons, eBay, General Electric, Marriott, Neiman Marcus, PayPal, Ryanair, Rakuten/Viber, Tesco, Verizon, Wells Fargo, as well as hundreds of other household names. Thanks to Couchbase for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. We really appreciate it. You mentioned something there about the fast learner thing. I have heard different people have different takes on this. One of the people who I respect the most about hiring, he's built some successful companies, and he said that when you're hiring at a startup, you should optimize for people who are wanting to grow. Yeah. And if you're hiring somebody where you're saying, well, this person needs to grow into this role, sometimes you might need to say, well, okay, this person, either they're going to be a fast learner or they're going to fail. So you do have to assume sometimes this person is telling the truth and that they're a fast learner, right? Like, so what's the disconnect there? Because you just said that there was, you hire for a fast learner, and then it turns out they're just unqualified and they can't learn. I don't know. How do you test for that?
Yeah, it's a hard one. Because obviously the field is changing all the time. So you can't really hire for static knowledge. You can't say like, oh, I'm hiring this person because they know this particular thing. You're working on a project that's Python and Django. And do you know Python and Django? And if you do, great. And if you don't, then no. Like, I think obviously it's the wrong criteria because things evolve and you need to, have people that are fast learners. So I think the key things to watch out there are, is there a history of learning and picking up things? And also in general, so I think by the time folks are doing professional development, generally you can identify certain aspects of folks that have done some learning on their own, right? They're either involved in sort of open source projects, or they've done something during their college tenure. They have in their internships, they have something that they sort of spend a summer at Google, did this, did that, right? So those are the things. Sort of a long answer to your question.
Well, no, and that gets at, I think, the idea, like, some people will be applying for a company and they're like, oh, I'm a fast learner. And then maybe you look at their resume and you're like, well, there's not really proof here that you're a fast learner. And they're like, no, but I'm a fast learner. What you actually need is a fast learner plus somebody who is a doer, and they're actually building stuff on their own, like particularly at a really small early company, because you need somebody who can build their own momentum and get something going. And it's not like, you don't want to hire the person who's like, oh, I'm a fast learner and I need you to give me instruction, like explicit instructions on how to learn everything. So you also mentioned that negative case you were talking about earlier. You put this person kind of on you started having this conversation with them where you're like, okay, you're not getting anything done here. You need to improve. How can I help you? And so on. At a larger company, this is often referred to as the performance improvement plan. I think at a larger company, it sometimes has the role of removing some of the liability for a company in terms of getting sued, because you have this person gets put on a performance improvement plan, and so that often is meant to signal to the employee you're going to get fired soon, so the employee will start looking for a job, and hopefully they'll just execute their own like getting off of the job, and you can reduce your liability as a company. I don't know. Talk more about the performance improvement plan idea.
Yeah.
Is this just corporate nonsense, or is this actually something that has practical merit to it?
Yeah. So I've seen all sorts of playbooks for performance improvement plans. So I spent some time being a manager at Microsoft. Obviously, I was a director at DocuSign, which started out small when I joined. By the time I left, it was a 2,000-person company. So I've seen it sort of in all shapes and sizes. I think the PIP, Performance Improvement Plan, definitely has a bad name because, frankly speaking, because I think a lot of people misuse it. So if your goal of putting somebody on a performance improvement plan to get rid of them, you're already past that. You're already in your mind. You're past helping them, and that you might not be helping them. The idea of performance improvement plan, and I think the reason why it was called as such, is to really actually help people improve their performance. I know myself, and I think a lot of people that are of technical background, it was early on, it's really hard for me to verbalize to someone, like, what is it that was missing, right? I was sort of like upset with somebody on my team because, this person was not delivering the results, or the code was crappy and was breaking stuff, or they were just but actually succinctly putting this into something that you can explain and walk a person through and really say, hey, Joey, like, we've got a problem here. You keep checking in the code and it keeps breaking other code. Like, what we need you to do is to maybe run some unit tests, maybe run some regression tests, maybe make sure that you talk to other, like these types of things where you're actually giving people guidance. We software managers don't really do that very well, I think, as a community. So in general, I think one of the interesting things to think about is just think about having an improvement plan, right? Like an improvement, because hypothetically, everyone wants to get better. I don't think you can survive in this business for too long if you're not getting better at your craft. And hopefully, you're working for a manager who cares about your progression in your career. So the case is when you need to let somebody go. It's when someone is not really improving in the direction that is helpful to the team. And I think in general, folks that on the receiving end of this performance improvement plan can make a decision like, is this team and is this person helping me advance in a way that is actually relevant and interesting to me? And hopefully, if clear, sort of succinct communication is happening between a manager or a leader and one of the team members, and somebody says, here's what we're sort of hoping that you would be doing. Here are some steps you could try, but these are the results we're hoping for. And if the person that's on the receiving end of this communication says, well, hey, listen, I'm not interested in this at all. And what I really want to do is something totally different. Then I think the exit is natural, right? It's like, hey, so like hypothetically, let's just say you go to some organization and you just really love, for whatever reason, I'm picking a really trivial example here, which most of the time would not make sense, but let's just go with this one. you just really love back-end web services programming, and you just don't care at all about JavaScript, maybe CSS and all of that stuff. And, but your task includes that, and you maybe do a crappy job at it, and your manager says like, hey, listen, Jeff, I really need you to like not break our UI, and there's all of these things you're doing in the CSS that are sort of considered hacks. Like, you should really pay more attention to it. But internally, you just say like, hey, listen, this is not my thing. I don't feel like I got hired for this, and just don't see any interest or future in brushing up on my CSS skills. So probably the best move for me is to find another gig where that's not going to be important.
Right. Okay. Let's shift to talking about hiring more on a more focused basis, because we've discussed this on Software Engineering Daily in a bunch of different contexts. It is, as I understand, it's the thing you've spent the most time on right now at Tempo Automation.
Yeah, team is growing, and absolutely hiring is the number one job.
And when I started this podcast, I was hell-bent on preaching that the whiteboarding interview process is the most broken piece of crap interview process in the world. And over time, I've realized, as frustrated as the candidates are with the whiteboarding interview process, as much as it sucks as a person coming out of school, like you come out of school and you come out of a boot camp and you've just done all this learning, and now you have to learn this entirely new skill set, which is whiteboarding. Because whiteboarding interview problems is much different than writing software. It's much different than writing university software. It's also much different than writing corporate software. But the reason we have this whiteboarding thing is because we don't have anything better. There's like nothing, we don't have anything better. And so I'm just curious, I'm always trying to talk to people about what are their hiring strategies. Have they found something that's a little bit better than whiteboarding, or how has whiteboarding been effective? How have they made it more effective? You talk to people about, we have somebody like solve a production bug before, as an interview task, and for some of them that works, but I don't know. Tell me about your hiring process and what works for you.
Yeah. So a couple of things that we're doing, and I want to be really upfront. Whiteboarding is a part of the equation for our hiring process. For that exact reason that you brought up, is that I just wish we found something better. But if somebody out of your community of listeners has a suggestion that I haven't heard, I'd love to try it out. And I'm in constant contact also with other engineering leaders in the Bay Area and sort of beyond. And I haven't come across anything else. But let me just go through sort of first of all the problem that you're after. So number one thing, and especially in this hot market when a lot of engineers make six figures and it's the go-to career, right? You sort of read articles on Business Insider. It's like, software engineering is like always at the top, it's like top 5 or whatever, right? Like maybe not any particular year, but generally it's a pretty sought after career. So, I think there is a tremendous number of enthusiasts there that really want to learn and everything. But there's a number of people that actually are just like, okay, well, I could be an accountant, I could be a paralegal, or I could learn a little coding and see if I can, make $100K, right? So, so there's a number of people that are actually just that aren't very good. And they just want to be in this for, that could be anything. And they're just looking at, Java or Python as like a tool to just get anything done from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And some of them actually do well, but there's a bunch of them that actually don't, they just can't code, right? You would not believe how many people I have talked to that applied for software engineer or senior software engineer role that just have no ability to code. Like they went through, they might not have a degree in this, which is totally fine. This field changes so much that degree is most of the time optional. But yeah, and then they're just, They went through some online course or they picked up a book and they think they're a fast learner, right? Coming back to that. And they're like, oh, great, I'm going to apply for this role. And you say, okay, great. So let's see if you can code. And they're like, well, I can because I've done this and I built a website for my uncle and I can Google for you sort of have these folks that use the same thing as a lot of people use about foreign languages. Like, well, I can't speak it, but I sure can understand it. Like,
right.
It's like, oh, I can read code just fine. Writing code is a little more challenging, but I usually find something on Stack Overflow. Like, great. Yeah. So the thing to think through here is, can you let this engineer? Do you trust this engineer to go into your system and sort of start making changes, building new things, potentially building things that other people use in the system? So yeah, there is unfortunately a ton of people that apply for software engineering jobs that just don't know how to do software engineering. So there's a number of ways to sort of filter those folks out. And I've talked to a few people that said, oh, okay, hey, why don't you just give these people like a problem that they can work on at home? They can, because it's really more true to what the job really entails.
Yeah.
So the thing is, the time to answer in that is so first of all, it's longer, right? Yeah. So you give somebody like 24 hours or something, so you don't, but maybe that makes sense. That's fine. Second of all, you still sort of have an issue of sort of copy and paste.
Exactly.
Right. So somebody, give somebody, a Ruby on Rails, say, oh, create me a little app in Ruby, and then they sort of go and they auto-generate scaffolding for an app, and they copy and paste some stuff, or they go through a tutorial and end up in the same place, right?
Yeah.
Or
they find the answer online.
Yeah, exactly. Or somebody else who went through your interview shares it, or something like that. Or through a similar interview, right? So there's that. There's another thing which is. Some people say like, oh, we'll pay you a consulting fee for a day, and you come in and you try and figure out our system, and if you can, like, great. But if you and there are several types of developers out there that have their unique approaches, and they're all valid. So I've got one engineer who's phenomenal. This guy takes, every sort of new module or new app that he goes into, he takes a couple of days to sort of go read through the other code, read the documentation, do all of this stuff. He would fail this interview. By the way, one of the most productive individuals I've ever met would not produce a line of code in a day, right? So that method fails, right? And then I think that so you're sort of over-rotating towards people that are just like, kind of like just go to the first possible solution, make something happen, and it's not really a foolproof method if you can employ it. The other interesting issue with that is to just do that particular thing. Like, let's say you just ask somebody like, hey Jeff, why don't you come in and fix some bugs? Well, maybe if you're like an early startup and you're sort of in an unregulated space, that's an option. That's totally fine. And you can, maybe some people are just flipping somebody a little cash, at the end of the day, right? Like, okay. But hypothetically, let's say you're working for SpaceX or something like that, then you can't employ the same method because people have to have clearance.
Right.
Right. So that method doesn't really work. Another thing that's really interesting about sort of like throwing somebody, and I've heard this like, oh, throw them into the pool, see if they can swim type of thing. Can they swim in our pool? That's the problem is that if you have a significant system, you might have a ton of stuff that's just really not generally available out there, or this person doesn't know what this is.
Right.
So for instance, when I was at Microsoft, I thought, I'm going to come in and sort of there's going to be a nice little Visual Studio project called Windows, and I'm going to like open it up in Visual Studio and hit build, and nothing of that sort. They had their own tools. I mean, just getting around in that
80
project.
internal tools.
Exactly. Right. So what would they find out if I just came in? I'm like, I have no idea how to even start. They'd be like, oh well, this guy's
well, okay. So should you give candidates the option of how they want to interview? Because if you're talking about these different interview strategies that might potentially work, maybe it would be useful to give them a buffet of options to choose from.
Yeah, I think the buffet of options comes up when you give people different questions, right? So I think one question might be around like software design, right?
You're talking about just whiteboarding questions.
Whiteboarding on paper, whatever.
Right.
Like have a discussion.
Yeah.
So have a discussion like you would if you were to work with this person. Hey, great, welcome. I'd love to just brainstorm with you about how to design a vending machine, right? Like, let's talk about the different modules and everything and see if this person tackles that.
Yeah.
I think a simple algorithm is a fair game. I mean, if you let's just be honest, like if you are applying to be a software engineer and you can't write an algorithm that maybe requires 2 loops,
right,
I think you're going to struggle. There's many times, even though there's a wealth of standard libraries for any respectable stack nowadays, and nobody runs binary search tree anymore. There is a lot of problems that you're dealing with. It's like, okay, go here, get this data set, iterate through it, find the things that fit this criteria, do something to them. Like that's fair game, and I think if you're struggling with that, that's definitely a red flag.
To understand how your application is performing, you need visibility into your database. Vivid Cortex provides database monitoring for MySQL, Postgres, Redis, MongoDB, and Amazon Aurora. Database uptime, efficiency, and performance can all be measured using Vivid Cortex. Don't let your database be a black box. Drill down into the metrics of your database with 1-second granularity. Database monitoring allows engineering teams to solve problems faster and ship better code. Vivid Cortex uses patented algorithms to analyze and surface relevant insights so users can be proactive and fix performance problems before customers are impacted. If you have a database that you would like to monitor more closely, check out vividcortex.com/sedaily to learn more. GitHub, DigitalOcean, and Yelp all use Vivid Cortex to understand database performance. At vividcortex.com/sedaily, you can learn more about how Vivid Cortex works. Thanks to Vivid Cortex for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily, and check it out at vividcortex.com/sedaily. How important are reference checks? Because I read this book about hiring called Who. This is like a really popular book about hiring that a lot of people recommend. One of the things that they really stress is the reference check process. Like, you cannot avoid doing reference checks, and it's really important. And even if somebody passes your hiring process, if they don't get through your reference, like, you should have a reference check process that probably screens some people out.
Yeah. So I don't think I answered actually the second part of the previous question, which is reference checks are related to, and that is, what is my hiring process, right? Which reference checks is step 4 of that. So step 1, I generally is an informal step, and I have not had this step in my process for the longest time, and I think it was detrimental to the type of people I found. So the first step is always just to gauge interest. Like, what is
quick call.
Just
quick phone call.
Grab a coffee with this person, if they're local, and just right now I work at a company that's doing hardware, so it's really interesting to actually visit. So people come over and do a factory tour, and that's really cool. It's like software. People love to see how hardware is made. So so it's great. So the number one thing in that first phase is to figure out, is there an interest? There's nothing worse than hiring disinterested people. Right. It goes back to the very, very first question you asked, is like disengagement.
And people that enter the funnel and they're not interested in your specific product. That's like a really bad sign.
Right.
It's like, okay, so you're just scanning through some job board and mass apply. So I'm working on this app. I'm starting this company, and I'm the first version of this app that I built. It's called Ad for Prize. The first version of it was contracted, and now I'm looking for an iOS developer to take over full time. And I've been trying to figure out how to hire people. I've been using AngelList to get some leads, and my process is, like you said, step one is set up a quick call with the people, and every single call that I've set up so far, my first question is, have you downloaded the app and tried it out? Yeah. Every single person has said no, and I'm like, well, why are we talking?
Right. I mean, in general, it's just fair to ask. And I stole, by the way, none of the stuff I'm using is invented by me. Right. So I stole this from a guy I learned a lot from. He happens to be the CTO of DocuSign. And he had one, his leading question was always, why you and why this company? Yeah. And if you don't have clarity answering that question, then exactly the question is, why are we talking?
And if they say, well, I was just applying to every job that I saw, is that instant no, or is that like, well, you're honest?
I think so everything in hiring, actually, it's really it's probably beyond like a 1 hour chat. You're putting together a team is sort of a little bit like playing a game of Tetris. Sometimes it's the pieces you got, right? But if you've got an interesting space, and you've got a promising company, and you've got a lead flow of good candidates that are interested in what you're doing, why in the world would you bring somebody in who is not interested? I mean, let's just be honest. Like, okay, well, hey, listen, you're not quite interested in what we're doing. You don't have some ideas. You haven't done the research. I mean, you're either a person that doesn't do the research about things in his or her life. Well, that's not a good sign for a software engineer. Or you're not quite interested in us, really, in particular, and just kind of spraying and praying with your resume, right? I mean, it's like, it's just a bad sign, right? Like, so somebody can possibly turn it around, but let me just say that if you are taking a call from a hiring manager, I sort of sympathize with some folks that are like, okay, like I need to grab, I need to just really, I need to get a job soon, so I'm gonna. But if
I've been there, I've done that.
It's like you're in a pinch. I totally get it. Yeah. But if you've got a call with a hiring manager, that's generally a sign that hey, they're interested in you. Yeah. And it's probably polite to figure out if you're interested in them. I don't know. That's step one, is just to figure out like, what's this person about? Why are they interested in this space? The best folks that I've hired have always been really they came with ideas. All right, so they said, oh great, you guys are doing sort of factory automation and we're doing robotics. I love robotics. This is what I've done, and this is the libraries that I've been using. And this is like, oh, great. You always think like, are you hiring? Is every consecutive hire a person who sort of takes are we going to learn from this person? And if this person is not interested in the space, he's going to eventually be a drag on the team. So that's step one, is to have that informal discussion with somebody. And after that, you can just be like, hey, listen, just doesn't seem like, you're talking about, you want to do mobile apps and, Yeah, it's like great. It's not what we do.
Yeah.
There's plenty of jobs for that. So
okay, so quickly take me through steps 2 and 3 and the reference check process, and then I want to talk a little bit about management of people when they're actually on board.
So steps 2 and 3. So number 2 is generally for us is the text screen. So we use code share or
the phone screen, phone text screen,
okay. And that's just being mindful of everybody's time.
Right.
So most of the engineers we talk to are employed. It is a hot market right now. So asking somebody to show up for half a day or a day, it's
that's step 3.
That is step 3.
Yeah.
But so in step 2, we generally either talk to people about some of their technical project and see if they've actually done it, or if they were just kind of
on the sidelines
of the third string quarterback of the championship team, so we do some coding and see if this person can put an algorithm together. Very critical in that is to not be focused on syntax, not be focused on a particular language. You need to be flexible on those things. I mean, basically what you're trying to assess is, can this person use computers to solve computer problems? And then step 3 is sort of meet the team, meet the management.
Yeah.
And
we kind of discussed that in the whiteboarding process.
Right. And then the last step is reference checks. So everybody that I've hired that was an excellent hire had excellent references.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was just a sample of one or a sample of, probably about 400 people that I interviewed in the last, 5 years or something like that. Or, that's just what it is.
Exactly. So that's why I think why this book emphasizes the reference check process so much is you will learn so much from the reference checks if you do it right.
Yeah. So couple of things to keep in mind there. Some companies that are trying to limit their liability don't actually disclose a lot of information about. Right. So you might call somebody. You might call somebody, and I don't know if this is the current policy, but let's just say you call somebody who used to work at Microsoft. Microsoft and other big companies are popular targets for lawsuits.
Right.
So they have strict guidelines for folks to just basically, yes, you can confirm that this person worked here, but no, you can't, really get super detailed, especially if it's negative.
Right. But if it's positive.
So I'm not certain, but I think the guideline is more or less to just confirm or deny that the person worked there, because if it's not positive, then it must be negative type of thing, right? It's easy to deduce that. But yeah, in general, I think references are super important. And given that you are asking this person for references, there's got to be somebody who was happy with their work.
Exactly.
Right. So I would say references are key. Don't skip that. Ask references open-ended questions. Things things that yield results for companies that don't have sort of like super strict lockdown on what. As what kind of things is this person working on? Like, what kind of areas of development are they? Do you think that they needed while you worked with them, what they do need, or something like that? And you can discover that hey, these are the things we're okay with, and these are the things that we're not okay with. I called in one, and I think about one reference check. And the person said, "Oh, this guy's really brilliant, but super stubborn." And I was like, "Oh, I think I can. I've worked with some stubborn people. I have a way of, I've grown some people into being able to take various points of view.
Sure.
So I can deal with that. That's fine. If that's, is that the worst? Is it the worst thing about this guy?
Right.
Great. He's stubborn? Great. In that case, is everything else great? Like, super brilliant engineer, but geez, just really, will come back to certain problems. Okay, great, I can work with that.
Yeah.
So
okay, interesting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about management itself, because we've kind of been talking about the hiring and firing process. Yeah. There is obviously management in between those lines.
Yeah, hopefully.
I had an interview a while ago with a guy named Michael Wolf, and we talked about dissent. So when you have people in an organization who are disagreeing with you, and this is valuable in some light, because as a manager, you want the dissenting opinions to percolate up, because oftentimes, the engineers who those opinions are percolating up from will have better insight into problems with an approach than you will. On the other hand, if you have engineers who are dissenting too much, then it can be disruptive. It can prevent you from actually being able to manage a team to accomplish a shared goal successfully. So how do you think about encouraging the right amount of dissent versus the right amount of, you guys need to kind of fall in line?
Yeah, so a lot of nuance to that, obviously. I think that part in and of itself is probably an hour worth of conversation. So obviously, there is some critical there's some critical things that every manager needs to be aware of when they're managing a group of software engineers. Number one, if you have not let go of the idea that you're not the smartest person on the team, you're doing yourself a disservice. Number one, you should always hire people smarter than you. And if you do, which I have, and that's the only way to scale as a software executive, is to hire people that know more than you in particular areas. Giving them ownership is very critical, because and you need to have that trust with folks, and just sort of like, great, you own this parser, and I trust that you're going to make the right decisions. You're the best expert on parsers that we could find potentially in the world. You are that person. So at that point in time, if you do have people that are competent and they have a sense of ownership, the dissent might happen from just different context, right? So some folks are like, hey, listen, I want to spend 12 months writing a parser in C that's going to be the fastest parser in the world, right? And then you say, great, well, listen, Mary, like we have 12 months of runway in the startup. So if it's going to take you 12 months to write the best parser in the world, and we're not really using the parser, well, we might run out of money. Right. So if that person can appreciate the different contexts, I would treat anytime you have dissent as opportunities to figure out, and you know what, at the same time, you might not have the right context. Right. And you might, that same person can say like, oh, hey, actually it's not going to take 12 months. It's going to take only 2 months. Yeah. And by the way, this parser is being used all the time, and the current one that we have is total garbage. And, I really need to sort of re-architect this thing. And I'm certain that, at that point in time, you need to be open to learning things as well. So I think there's constructive dissent around shared goals, but I think there's when you don't relinquish some ownership and don't have some trust, you might have this sort of weird state where after a while it's just like a little bit of a power struggle, and I think as a manager, really important to pay attention to that. The number one key thing all the time is that if you're making all of the decisions, you're not leveraging your team.
As a manager, do you try to keep emotional distance from the employees you're managing, or do you try to be friends with them?
Great question. I've tried it several ways. I've been And I would say my philosophy is be friends with people you're working with. It's more fun like that. I think you get a lot of trust and early warning signs about people are more open with problems. The sort of like the opposite spectrum of just saying like, oh, it's strictly business, we're not, that's fine. I don't know if it's the best way to go. I generally found that people that are
not for software engineering, it doesn't seem to be.
I mean, maybe in an environment where things are sort of defined and predictable.
Medicine.
I'm not sure. I don't know enough about that business, but let's just say, for instance, you're like, yep, I know exactly what you're doing. It's what you need to come in and make these pizza pies.
Right.
Like, all right, so it's all the pizza pies are fine, then we're fine. But I think a lot of people don't appreciate how emotional software is. Right. I think, and for folks that are sort of looking to go into management, just be aware you're going to be everybody's therapist. Like that is what you're going to be doing. Like maybe 20 to 30% of the time. There's going to be people that are going to be upset because somebody didn't listen to them. There's going to be people that are going to be upset because it seemed like you didn't take their context into account when you made a decision and they feel left out. There are going to be people that want to get paid more. There's some people that think that the company is going in the wrong direction. It's a very emotional thing. There's some people that just want to be left alone because they just, people keep bugging them, but they really want to dig into their work and people keep asking them questions, type of thing. So as the higher up the management chain you go, the less and less code you get to work with, and the more and more people's emotional, you're like debugging people's emotions. Like oftentimes you need to add a lot of soft skills to your arsenal.
Right. So as we draw to a close, you worked at Microsoft for 4 or 5 years. You worked at DocuSign for 9 or 10 years. Yeah. And now you've worked at Tempo Automation for less than a year. Yep. And so these companies, so you saw DocuSign go from very few people to a lot of people. Yep. You saw Microsoft go from a lot of people to just more people, I guess.
Right.
You're seeing Tempo Automation. I mean, you're managing the growth of that company. How have the management structures of these companies contrasted, and what are the overarching lessons that you have learned about how the size of a company relates to the management processes in a company?
There's definitely a lot more process you need to have as your team grows. But I actually think it's very good to have a lot of rigor in your management, regardless of size, because what happens is with the size of the company and the size of the team, really, it's sort of like a wobbly wheel at higher speeds just falls off, right? So it's the same thing. Like if you don't have a tight process, and I'm actually thinking about putting a lot of sort of my processes up on my blog, just like so people can just grab them.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that maybe crowdsourcing will make them better. But yeah, so process is, you want to have just the right amount, and you want to make sure that it's just helpful process. So it's always good to prune it. The rule of thumb that I have in my head is sort of like what the Vikings used to have in back in the day. If you can't remember it, it's not important. So if you can't remember that there is some sort of best practice around that, then probably no one else can either. But things like coming up with a good defined process for hiring. It's just good. So folks understand. So many times, for instance, folks will interview somebody and everybody asks the same question, and you sort of huddle back together and say,
right.
Well, it's like, oh, well, great. Did anybody ask this person about architecture? No, we all did an algorithm.
The linked list.
Yeah, exactly. We all did an algorithm on the board. Like, great. So this person can do algorithms on the board, and we know nothing else about this person.
Right.
I have no idea. Do we hire this person? Do we not hire this person? Right. So like that type of stuff. Doing people's reviews and raises. It's like when you don't. So, I mean, I have this grid which I've partially, borrowed from people, and it's sort of built up over the years. And it's like, hey, if you're good, you're doing these particular things. And if we have to do all these other things, then you're probably not so good, right? So you can judge yourself. So those types of things. I think the management really, a lot of times when you find yourself in the space where you're like, oh man, I don't have enough process, or I need to have more managers. Check whether or not you're hiring right, because the people that are interested, engaged, and great generally need less processes and less management overhead, and actually try to run away from it. In fact, that's probably why we're seeing a lot of folks sort of leave big companies after a while and go to small companies, because they're like, oh my God, I just need to get my stuff done. I can't have a 7-person sign off before I ship a feature,
Yeah.
So I think it's just about, it's about being smart and, also utilizing, sort of this Kaizen, which is one of sort of the popular methods, I think, borrowed from, manufacturing, it's continuous improvement. It's like, can you get with people on a regular basis, whether it's a monthly or quarterly thing? And it's like, what are some of the things we should start, we should stop, or we should continue? And if everyone says like, oh my God, I really hate, filling out this form. And it's like, great. It is your job as a manager, to make everybody as effective and as happy as they can be. So basically it's, as a manager, you take care, find the right people, take good care of them, and give them everything to succeed. And if they're the right people, if you did A, and you're doing B and C, you should have great results. And if not, then something is going off.
All right. Well, that sounds a reasonable place to conclude. We didn't even talk about tempo automation, but if listeners are interested in manufacturing or automating the process of getting things from a hardware idea to a finished piece of manufactured hardware, they can check out Tempo Automation. You guys are obviously hiring.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a pretty cool problem space. Yeah, what we're doing is electronics manufacturing on demand. So what the service does is, if you are a PCB engineer, or if you're doing hardware, which a lot of people are nowadays, you upload a CAD file, and then Amazon Prime style, 3 days later you get the part, which is pretty cool. And and we're seeing a pretty profound effect on the industry with this service. It's introducing agility into hardware development. It's great.
Well, that sounds really interesting. Maybe we should discuss that on another episode. But Mike, thanks for coming on and talking about management. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to Symfano for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symfano is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symfano.com/sedaily. That's symphono.com/sedaily. Thanks again, Symfano. Wow.